least transparent executive branch budgets to having a very, very strong product that now really does have a lot of stuff in there that helps you understand what's in the budget, how they came to decisions, and compares it back to prior years with all kinds of historic data. So I encourage you to go to that website and look at it.
Thank you. I'm the big player here. I'm only going to talk for a few minutes. I'm David Sullivan. I'm the General Counsel at Administration and Finance, also here on behalf of Governor Patrick, Lieutenant Governor Murray, and of course Secretary Kerwin, my immediate boss. Thanks again to Senator Jehlen and all of her staff for inviting us all here today. I want to make 2 points. One is just to reiterate something that Matt said. On behalf of Governor Patrick, who has certainly taken his lumps a little bit in the last few days, I think you need to recognize how hard he tried to maintain existing services in the face of what is the worst financial crisis this state has faced since the Great Depression. As Matt stressed, lots of cuts that got made during the Republican administrations that have passed, during the last days of the sort of Cellucci-Swift administration and during the Romney administration, were not made this year, even though the financial crisis is much worse. Existing services have been maintained almost completely, and that's because of a lot of commitment by the governor and the people who work for him, including Matt especially, in an atmosphere where it was not easy to do that. So that's a point that I think doesn't get said often enough, and I really want to stress it here tonight because I know all of you are concerned about those issues. It's something that really don't notice because services are continuing, but it's something that you need to stress because a lot of other states aren't doing that, and in the past Massachusetts hasn't done that. So that's the first point. The second point I want to make is, as the governor has said many times, this crisis is an opportunity for reform. You've heard what is now basically a cliche, never let a good crisis go to waste. That's been attributed to lots of people. I think Rahm Emanuel might be one of those people. But the governor firmly believes that. And so this list of legislation is a good example of the kinds of, this is all part of what he's calling his recovery plan. And it's you might say, well, what does ethics reform have to do with the recovery plan? But he views this as an overall opportunity to change the way that the Massachusetts government does business. And these are, this is a package that he has presented to the legislature, and the budget is part of it, and Matt has done an excellent job, and Noah before him, of explaining what those challenges are. I want to mention the first bullet here, something that I feel strongly about, and I know that Rep. Shortino, who's clapping in the background there, also feels strongly about, is an effort to make the tax expenditure side of the budget a little bit more transparent. And Noah and Matt both spoke about the importance of transparency, and they're right. What you don't recognize is that we spend tax money in 2 ways. We spend it in direct appropriations, which is what Matt's been talking about, but we also spend it in what are called tax expenditures, which means essentially setting a basic tax rate and then giving a break from that tax rate, either by a deduction or an exemption, for particular kinds of taxpayers who do things that the government wants to encourage. And what we don't often pay attention to is the fact that those kinds of expenditures go on every year without the legislature having to revisit them. So this section of our budget is an effort to require annual reports about some particular tax expenditures that show what kind of good they're doing. For example, one of them is the low-income housing tax credit. We'd like to know how many low-income housing units are being built or renovated using that tax benefit. How many people are benefiting from it? How much is it costing? And who's getting those tax benefits? Right now, that information is protected by law. Even though these things function much the same way that state grants do, we don't know who is getting that money. And there are lots of other tax credit programs as well. So that's what the governor is proposing. I think it's actually a very important part of the effort to make this whole budget more transparent, and I just want to call your attention to it. Then there are a whole bunch of reforms that we're trying to do. Some of them would save money. For example, transferring county sheriffs to the Commonwealth. We have 14 counties in Massachusetts. 7 of them had their, including this one, Middlesex County, as you probably remember, had their county's governments abolished in the late 1990s. But there are 7 county governments that still exist, and in those 7 counties, the sheriff is a county official, although in this county, the sheriff is a state official. It seems crazy. We have 2 different systems. We're trying to bring everybody under the same roof, and we can save roughly $8 million a year. Sorry, that was a little wishful thinking. $8 million a year by having all of those sheriffs move into the state group insurance system, which is the way that we pay healthcare costs for state employees, and bring them into the state retirement system, and bring them most importantly, into the state accounting system so that we can actually find out how they're spending their money, which we can't do right now. And there are other reforms too, and I will only spend a minute describing them. We want to expedite the way that state surplus property is disposed of according to smart growth principles. We want to sort of enhance the partnership that the governor has established with municipalities around the state by giving municipalities some additional tools to save money and to help them to do the job that they do. One of the main targets here is greater regionalization so that services can be delivered not just by 351 separate cities and towns, but by groups of cities and towns working together and saving money. Pension reform is something you've been reading a lot about lately. The Senate actually passed a very good bill yesterday, and the governor had a lot to do with that. He proposed a great plan about 2 weeks ago. Transportation reform is another thing we're working on very hard. This is another bill that the Senate recently passed. We're working hard with them and with the House. We're hoping that we can bring all of the various transportation agencies together and save some money doing that. And finally, ethics reform, which is something that is desperately needed on Beacon Hill, as I'm sure we can all agree. I used to be the lawyer for the State Ethics Commission, so I can personally relate to that. And it's something that the governor feels very strongly about. His chief legal counsel, Ben Clements, worked very hard on. And we're very happy that the House has passed an excellent ethics bill in the last few days. So again, this is part of the administration's reform agenda. It's connected with our budget. It's designed partly to save money, but it's also designed to change the way that things work on Beacon Hill, and that's something that Governor Patrick feels very strongly about and will continue to work very hard on. And I look forward to, after Judy has a chance to utter her few words, I look forward to having a chance to answer your questions, so thank you.
Senator Jehlen, I didn't get the memo about pinstripe suits and red ties. So you'll have to take me as I am. Thank you very much. I'm Judy Meredith, and I'm working in a project called One Massachusetts, and it's all about communicating with our legislators and our administration about how government should be reformed and fully funded. And I want everybody who's been sitting and looking at charts. I promise you no charts, but I do want you to stand up. Need a little stretch. Good. Okay, put your fingers straight up in the air. Put your fingers straight up in the air. Really stretch. You can feel it, right? Okay. Now I'm going to walk around. I want you to make a circle, a clockwise circle, about 2 feet in diameter, and keep it going. Everybody got it? 2 feet. Look up and make yourself a circle. Okay, now stop making a circle and watch me for a minute. I'm going to bring the circle down like this, and I'm going to bring it down and look down at it. Okay, now everybody do that. Make a circle, 2 feet diameter. Now bend your elbow and bring it down and look down at it. What direction is that circle going in?
Down.
Counterclockwise. Okay, think about it. You're sending a message to the legislature. Reform before revenues. All right? And they're getting that message. You think you're delivering that message. And they're looking at it and they're saying revenues before reform. No, you have to keep your finger up. You have to, okay, sit down. And I'll walk. This is good stretch. Watch me do it. You can see it's going clockwise from my point of view. And then you bend down and you look at it, and lo and behold, it's going counterclockwise. It's so important, the language we use, when we talk about what we want out of government. Now, you just have to put your hand up. Put your right hand up if you consider yourself a community activist that's working in your neighborhood or your community or the state program that you want to repair and reform. That you care about a certain program and you're working hard to make sure it's really, come on, Noah, put your hand up. Okay, there's a lot of people here. Well, One Massachusetts runs programs all over the state, training programs, to help community activists get ready to talk about taxes. It's been a dirty word for a long time, right? And go ahead, Noah. And One Massachusetts is a network of people. We're not a coalition, we're not an organization. People sign up, you're going to get an opportunity to sign up. You can do it online. When you leave, you get a little fact sheet. We're a network of people. We'll help you do trainings. We do about 5 trainings a week with big groups and small groups. And our main goal is to rebuild public confidence and our capacity to work together. Community activists know we have to work together with each other and with our elected and appointed officials through our government to expand economic opportunity and improve the quality of life in Massachusetts. Our goal, and we're working very closely with an organization called the Demo Center for the Public Sector, this is a big project, is to build public support for a government dedicated to the common good and empowered to address the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. And this is how we do it. We teach advocacy skills, how to communicate about government. We teach budget and tax policy literacy. I mean, you got a course here this afternoon by these 2 pinstripe-clothed gentlemen, all 3 of them, that really said this is where your tax dollars go, and this is how they're collected. A lot of people don't know that, and they don't know that on the local level either. And we work with, for instance, we work very hard with folks who are working on the Vote No One Question One campaign. We're working on local 2.5 activists on the local level all over the state. You can switch. And the first thing we do is set up a flip chart, and we say if you were moving into a new community, what would you be looking for? Well, let's hear it. What would you be looking for?
Good schools.
Affordable housing, schools, city services,
Parks.
Transportation, bike paths,
Library.
healthcare,
Safety.
public safety, sidewalks.
Libraries.
Oh, good, thank you. Libraries, I was up in Amherst, they go arts and dancing.
Local commercial district with a wide variety of things.
And then we look down at all of those lists of things we want in our communities and we say, which one is supported by local or state government? Do you know how many? All of them. And people sit there and go, huh, I never thought about that. My dog park that we just created, that's right, it's supported by town government. You know, it's important that we understand. And Noah sort of did this in his first introduction. Next, Noah. And our challenge is rebuilding confidence in our government. Next. And we've got a problem. We've got a problem. You know, I used to be a lobbyist full-time, which hasn't got the best reputation in the world. But, you know, it's not quite as bad as how people generally feel about government itself. They're just not, they don't think about it. If I walked up to people, cognitive science, cultural anthropologists with the Demo Center have done a lot of deep research, not just polling, focus groups, deep interviews and everybody. And they found that there are very dominant and resilient images that misdirect thinking about government. If I walked up to you today, sir, and said, what do you think about government?
No.
You don't. That's a lot of the answers. Okay. What do you think about government?
Something that should help people live well.
Oh, good. That you should. But most people laugh Government, they don't even think about. You agree, sir?
Yes.
Yeah. You were behind you, you were nodding your head?
I was shaking my head, actually.
Okay.
I was thinking that government is what we all agree to do together.
Oh, wonderful.
And that's a point that tends to
Yeah,
get
that's right, that's right. We've got a very sophisticated audience. But most people don't have that attitude. People have what my kids used to say, Ma, you got an attitude about me. You know, most people have a bad attitude about government. And most people don't have a concrete image of the systems and the structures of government that exist. People get up in the morning and brush their teeth, turn on the water to get the water. They don't think about the water treatment plant that's in the back of the town that hasn't been upkept for 20 years. And they think like consumers. They think like, I want to get my money's worth. This is how people think. They don't think as citizens in the sense of the Roman citizen. We have a citizen view of government that we understand. Next, Noah. And these are our hurdles in trying to help people talk about government and talk not just to their public officials, but to their neighbors and friends about how important government is. Because most people think that government is those partisan, bickering politicians. And taxes are paid to those corrupt and incompetent individuals. They think government is dimly understood, but you know, here they are up here, and then there's this bureaucratic blob down there. And taxes are swallowed and wasted by the invisible and effective blob. Does this all sound familiar? Government is, or they think government's a vending machine. They just want their taxes to get what they get. They're being taken from me and given to those people over there. They don't have that sense. Next, Noah. And so our job in One Massachusetts and these individual over-the-fence conversations with each other, we're helping local individual advocacy organizations or individuals talk about their advocacy program in a different way that'll help rebuild confidence in government. So right now, the story is budget crisis means cuts are the answer. Boom, we've got a budget crisis, let's cut. And we've got to shift it to say there are economic challenges that need wise decisions. You know, the governor's gone through a huge process of trying to make some wise decisions that include both cuts and revenues. People think we want, the dominant story is people want to keep their money. That was the whole debate during the last gubernatorial campaign. Do we give a tax bill? I keep my money. Jerry Jehlen wanted to keep the money. We talk about maintaining the quality of life in our community. All government spending is bad. There's been 40 years of a concentrated campaign to say government ought to be smaller and we ought to cut taxes. And there's been a whole campaign about, for years, about people taking the tax cut pledge. No new taxes. I mean, I remember, how many people here remember David Lederman, who was a state rep from Medford, who worked for Governor Dukakis, and yes, was he Malden? You're right. Worked for Governor Dukakis, a no new taxes governor in the early 70s, who ended up not winning the election. But David Lederman was his chief of staff. And they were part of that. No new taxes, no new taxes. Taxes will make things worse, and we've got to talk about a responsible budget, looks at both revenues and expenditures. And so we talk as advocates, what kind of story do we tell? We're talking about telling stories. What do you remember about Chicken Little? Well, did anybody pay attention to it? No. Didn't pay attention to it. Oh, this guy's fault, this guy's fault, this guy's fault. I have spent the last 25 years of my career as an advocate playing Chicken Little. Oh, this is happening. These people are going to die. These people are going to die. This is terrible. This is terrible. And you know what happens? People turn off. Doesn't affect them. They don't care. They're worried about their old lives. There's nothing I can do about it because what we did was do fact sheets that talked about all the terrible things, and on page 4 was a solution. That if only somebody did this who cared about it as much as we do. We've been playing Chicken Little. What did we learn about the little engine that could?
I think I can.
Perseverance, focus, work hard, get up the hill, and succeed. So we have to think of, in this crisis, specific ways, like the governor has proposed and other people are proposing. If we do these things, we'll be in a position to survive. Next. Oh, I'm sorry, this is desperation and that's aspiration. So this is the aspirational way of talking about things. So the elements of all of our news stories, and think about this as you read the paper. And you know, how many people, you read the headline, you say, this is attack on the most vulnerable. People say, well, I'm not vulnerable, so they don't even read it. People say this substance abuse, it's gonna, you know, closing drug treatment centers, it's gonna be awful, but I don't care, so they don't even read it. So we've got to stop making laundry lists and start talking about values. We frankly have to talk about less about protecting the vulnerable. This is tough. This is tough. For those of us who care about poor, the elderly, and disabled, and we have to talk about looking forward to building and repairing systems. We have to stop talking in a crisis mode and talk about preserving our communities. Enough short-term thinking. Now, you're getting in 10 minutes what we do a training for an hour and a half to help people understand this. And we have to stop talking about how much it will cost to what kind of state you want. And we lead with values. Connect services or programs to quality of life and the community well-being. We talk about the unique role of public institutions. They can do things, somebody said, that we can't do by ourselves. That we supported personas of government. There are some things that people understand. They're supposed to protect us from imported toys that have lead in them, and the lettuce that has dirt on it. There's supposed to be government functions that protect us. Government's supposed to be a long-term planner and a steward and a protector. We understand that. That's still there, deep in our inner citizen, of even our most cynical neighbors. And we have to talk about how spending decisions and taxing decisions affect all of us in the future of our state. And we have to avoid the pitfalls of scare tactics. Next, Noah. And we have to begin to describe some of our public programs, and this really works, as public structures that include the physical structures, highway, airports, communications, and organizational structures like the postal system and social services. Why is public structures a good term? The public structures that educate our children and keep our water clean. What about a public structure has to happen?
You have to invest in it.
It has to be built, it has to be designed,
It has to be maintained.
and it has to be maintained.
Well funded.
And well funded, adequately funded, that's right. People understand that. Oh, yeah.
They don't.
Well, not enough. Do you? Yes, you painfully do. Good. Here's another way to think about that we use in one of our trainings about talking about public structures. Here's, it all goes into the general fund, keep going. And if you don't fund it enough, oops, it's fall off, never mind. So here all, it's not free, but there are different leads and stuff about, did we put libraries in there? Oh God, this one doesn't have libraries, I'm sorry. Okay, and this sort of rounds out the whole story of public structures and the role of our elected officials. Here's us. We elect these people to really build and maintain these public structures that educate our children, that keep our streets safe, that provide affordable housing and social services. And those public structures yield benefits that come to all of us. And so there's a circle all around. And it really puts our public officials into a position of being managers, long-term managers and planners. And here's just a little example of some of the messaging work we do. And we work with groups and we look at their proposals and we help them use different wording so it reflects some of the things we just talked about. Here, read that quickly. The tax break that the legislature is considering is bad policy, blah, 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 lowest tax burdens and further reductions will only result in the loss of government services that people like and expect. You think that's a seller? No. Here, these are projects in our state that need to be taken on for everyone's good. From repairs to our bridges and upgrades to our schools' technology to improve access to health care and more affordable higher education. Taxes are a means for getting these things done together. Changes to our tax system that reduce revenues threaten our prosperity and quality of life. Here's a good trick. Think about how you would explain taxes to a 5-year-old. How would you do it? Anybody want to suggest it? How would you explain taxes to a 5-year-old?
That's what gives you schools.
What?
That's what gives you schools.
That's what gives you schools.
And that's my daughter, she's the one.
What did you say?
Say everybody pays in a little bit, and then that makes enough money to take care of things that everybody.
Nice, nice. Everybody pays in a little bit, and that creates enough. So is that you back there, Fred? Do you have an idea?
Taxes are like the food you're eating. If you don't eat them, you won't have any energy to do anything.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay.
Take him out shopping.
What?
Take him out shopping. Tell him how to pay the taxes.
Okay, this is the last one. Most of us as advocates go in to talk about our little things, and we just say, hi, here I'm Chip, I'm here for TANF, I'm here for prescription assistance, blah, blah, blah. Or I'm here to reducing bycatch. Anybody knows what reducing bycatch is?
Yeah.
Any fishermen in here? Come on, that's the extra fish you get up that you're not supposed to catch. And sometimes we go in and we talk about we're anti-poverty, we're women's rights, we're environmentalists, we're workforce development. And what we should be doing is going in all the time to talk about the common good and common goals like justice and strong families and the quality of life and prosperity. And that's the exercise that we normally do. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a few minutes for comments, questions.
I have a question. I'm Roger Wilson from Winchester. And my question is about the benchmarking expenses as a percent of personal income. The personal income increases above inflation by productivity gains. And if government is rendering the same services and making anything on the order of productivity gains that is taking place in the private sector, you would expect the percentage of personal income to go down, as it has, although it's gone slightly. But my question is, why is it that we would expect government to stay steady as a percent of personal income?
It's a good question. I'll give two answers to the question about why government spending should stay steady as a share of personal income rather than decline over time as a share of personal income. Partly, the areas of the economy in which we tend to get productivity gains are areas where technology can be implemented to improve productivity. For example, manufacturing and areas like that. On the service side of the economy, it's a very different model. So in things like healthcare and education, it's very hard to get fewer people to take education. It's very hard to think of how fewer people could provide higher quality education using technology, which is a model for economic growth. And throughout the long term, costs for manufactured goods go down relative to services because those types of efficiencies are possible. It's kind of a technical answer. But the other point to make is that basically as we grow wealthier as a society, it's a question of what we spend that extra wealth on. If we can choose to spend all of the extra wealth on consumer goods, or we can choose to spend some of the extra wealth on improving the quality of education for the next generation of people or not. And finally, healthcare is the big sort of elephant in the room. Healthcare costs, for a whole lot of reasons, in the private sector and the public sector are going up much more rapidly than inflation, and in fact, faster than economic growth. So it's fortunate that the private sector economy grows in real terms because it allows us in both the public and private sectors to be able to pay for things like healthcare costs, which do, frankly, that's sort of the reverse of a increasing efficiency over time, and in fact, over time, grow more quickly in the economy, partly because there are areas where we actually keep getting better healthcare, that is, you have new technologies developed that tend not to drive down costs, but to extend lives or keep people healthier longer. So, but the point of comparing spending in government to the private sector economy is really a point about sustainability. If public spending is growing faster than the economy, then you have a potential problem in that you would have to keep raising taxes to keep pace with the spending growth. If government spending is growing at the same rate as the economy, that means with no changes in tax policy, that same level of spending is sustainable over the long term.
Yeah, what's your,
I'm Al Schmersford. I would like to know why it is still such a sin to fail to raise the state income tax back up to the level we had about 8 or 10 years ago. If I recall Noah's numbers, the amount that we're short is pretty close to what we've lost in revenue. And it seems to me that if we all pitched in a little bit, and it isn't a hell of a lot, we wouldn't have to suffer the cuts in education, in healthcare. I'm particularly involved in education because I'm on a school committee. And I see this as stupidity, a failure to face the fact that we have generated the structural deficit that Noah described, and nobody's willing to look at it and solve the problem.
Elizabeth Goodney. I'm on the Finance Committee in Winchester, and we're going through our budget season right now, and we're trying to understand what the local aid numbers are going to be for Winchester before we can actually put forward our budget to town meeting. And I came here tonight hoping to get, I don't know, some guidance or some knowledge of, what that date's going to be when we have an indication that this number is the number that's coming to Winchester for Chapter 70 funding, for other types of local aid. And I don't know if anybody in this room can answer that question.
oh, wait a minute, I don't want to do bad stuff.
Here, I'll that's my job. Okay, here's why you don't know the answer yet. Because the governor has put out his number.
Right.
He can tell you, you can look at House 1 and see how much, go right
I know
on.
that.
Go right online, mass.gov/budget, you can see what the governor proposes as your local aid number. Problem is, we have a legislature that needs to pass it. And they
Pat, you should answer this.
You didn't want to answer it. Let me say it this way. First, the House has to pass its budget, then the Senate has to pass its budget, and then it has to go to a conference committee and be reconciled. And the new fiscal year isn't going to begin until July 1st, and in all likelihood, they won't have a budget ready until then. Now, in the past, sometimes, and sometimes not, the legislature has passed something called a local aid resolution, which is an effort to make a prediction, which basically is binding on the legislature, as to how much they're going to do for local aid by city and town. And that has happened in some years, and it hasn't happened in other years. The problem from all three of us worked in the legislature, so we know what it's like. Matt was the budget director at Senate Ways and Means for a while. The problem is, if you're in the legislature, you don't want to pull out the local aid number from everything else that's going on. Make a promise about that, and then have to basically take that out of the equation for everything else that you're doing in the budget. That's the problem for the legislature. It's not a problem for the governor. It's easy for the governor. The governor can do everything at once at the beginning of the year. But if you're in the legislature, you may want to factor all, and especially at a time when revenues are falling off a cliff, which they are right now, if you don't know what revenues you have to work with in FY10, it's a very hard thing to do to say, okay, we're going to make a promise, 2 months before we pass our budget about how much local aid there's going to be in that budget. That's the problem. Did
Can I
do
say from my
justice to that?
perspective what's the problem?
Yes.
It's that every time we get a revenue estimate, it's millions of dollars less, not millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars less. So that our understanding is that the governor submitted his budget, the House budget will be smaller by a lot. The Senate budget will probably be smaller than the House budget. And it may be, if the revenues continue to fall, that the conference committee will cut both the House and the Senate budget. We are in free fall. It is very bad. I said I was going to be bad, but that's why. It's not only that we need to balance things, not just local aid. It's that we don't know how deep this hole is going to get. And after the conference committee report, there could still be 9 seat cuts next year if the revenues continue to go like that.
So can I ask
Why did I do that?
what would you advise towns to do? Like as
I would, if I were in a
finance
town,
committee
I would advocate for more municipal resources so that you could be like communities in the rest of the country that have more things to turn to besides the property tax. Because everybody hates the property tax, and you need a bigger variety of things that you can use locally, because you can't, right now, you can't count on what you've been counting on from the state.
So, in other words, local.
Yes.
Right.
I'm going to answer that question in a slightly different way, which is, there's been, I know that was great, but I'm going to talk about something different. There's been a lot of confusion about the education money that the governor distributed a couple of weeks ago, where it looked like some communities that had no right to get any money got a lot of money, and some communities that desperately needed money didn't get any money. I'm going to try to explain why there were some specific problems with the distribution, but it's not nearly as bad as a lot of people think. First of all, the most important thing to recognize is that although it's not reported in most of the stories, most of the money that was distributed went to really low-income cities that if they didn't have that money, they wouldn't be able to spend at what the state has defined as the minimum amount that you need to spend to provide an adequate education. And frankly, the state constitution requires that every city be able to spend at a minimally adequate level. So we don't read about, most of the money went to the Springfields and the New Bedfords, the other communities that really need it. So we have a historic funding formula for Chapter 7, it's called the Foundation Budget Formula, that distributes most of its money to those communities. About 3 years ago, there was a lot of distress, frankly coming mostly from higher income communities, that our core formula provided too much of the money to the most needy communities in the state. And there were a series of reforms that the legislature adopted, one of which was to say that every community will get at least 17.5% of its budget, education budget, paid for by the state. So that means the very wealthiest communities, those that got the least under the historic formula, would get the most of that new aid. It was an element of the aid formula specifically designed to provide the most money to the least needy communities, out of the sense that they were getting nothing. That's being phased in over 5 years. Part of the money that the governor distributed, most of it was to distribute to the historic formula. Part of it was to fund that new initiative that was designed to provide more money to the Welsleys of the world. I frankly think in a fiscal crisis that probably should have been suspended, and then the whole distribution would have looked a lot less unfair, and that certainly is an option available to the legislature. The other area where there were some really low-income communities that didn't get money was often because those communities had declining enrollments. And the way the formula works is it figures out what your need is based on a cost per student in your community, higher and lower cost in low-income communities, and your enrollment. And the communities that have declining enrollments, the formula looks at them and says they don't need the money as much as a district with an increasing enrollment. And frankly, I don't think that's a crazy idea either, that you need more new money if you have more students to educate, and probably less new money if you have fewer students. There are other elements of the formula also where historically some communities, if you take two like communities, like Peabody and Salem, was a story in the Globe a couple weeks ago that said, I hope I get the facts right, that Salem was getting money, Peabody wasn't. Why is that? Well, if you look historically, they are very similar communities. And Peabody, historically, Salem, which was getting the money, historically had been spending more of its local resources on education, and Peabody had been spending less. So the formula was set up actually to try to remedy those, to try to bring them in line, and that's what happened. So because this formula was trying to make up for historic changes where one set of communities was getting more money and others weren't, and giving more to those that weren't, if you just look at a snapshot, it looks like it's completely irrational. So it's a long way of saying there are reasons for most of the distributions. Some of them are very good reasons. Some of them are bad reasons. Legislature still has it within their power to fix that. I'll stop there.
I think we're going to be leaving in a few minutes. I want to recognize Superintendent Roy Belson.
I agree with Noah about the stimulus funding. I mean, he's quite right about the way he's described it. And the biggest issue is the fact that a formula that was developed to transition wealthy communities to a minimum level of aid should have been suspended during a period of major fiscal problems. Now, the federal law required that we stick with the formula, but quite frankly, the formula has other things in it that we weren't stuck with. For example, growth aid, minimum aid. Other things could have been looked at, you know what I mean, in that same thing. And quite frankly, there's still opportunities under the 18% that's allowable by the governor to distribute to other things besides education. It might be a great opportunity to restore the additional assistance that's being cut from communities like Medford and Somerville, which are taking a huge cut. You could put 85 communities back on the boards for what they're going to lose in additional assistance in FY09 for just under $25 million. That's not a lot of money to help communities that are really bad. Somerville and Medford alone are still catching up from the Romney 20% cuts that were done in 04. We're still behind. We're still not there. I think there's room for discussion off that level. But a bigger issue is why charter schools get to keep $100 million in the bank. Because the actual reality is that they're spending our money, they're holding it. $833 per pupil is set aside for capital costs. They don't have to spend it on capital costs, they just can bank it. That's $20 million that goes out this year that could be recaptured because they're not going to be building this year. Very few of them are going to be building. That's money that should come back to the communities that are spending the money for the charter school things. There's a lot of issues that are out there. No question that the governor and the legislature have a lot to struggle with, and I think there's a lot of good faith effort on the part of the administration, a lot of good faith effort on the part of the legislature to solve things. But these are areas to pay attention to. Because quite frankly, if you don't, you'll have a lot more communities falling below foundation and bleeding to death and falling out of compliance in the next little while than anyone fully understands. So I think that's really something to deal with. And every dollar you give to the charter schools requires you to backfill with foundation funds right afterwards.
Let's take two more, or I see three hands. Bill takes questions.
I just wanted to let, my name is Matt Haberstra. I represent a group called Advocating for Medford Public Schools. There's about 200 of us now. I just wanted to see if I can get an update from our state reps and senators about the charter school issue, because we support Roy in revising that formula because we want it to be fair. We're not anti-charter school, but we want to have more equitable formula to help us out, especially in this time of crisis. So I need to know, at least my group needs to know, because we've called you, talked to the mayor, gone to a rally and presented ideas to you, so I just want to know where that's happening now.
Well, I know, I've been doing all the talking, Carl and Paul.
I know that the new chairperson of education, Marty Walsh, is at least cognizant of what Representative Sharpino and Galloway and I know other members of the legislature have been talking with regard to charter schools. We're all distressed that here we are in the traditional public schools
struggling for dollars, and charter schools have about $133 million statewide in their coffers to, as surpluses. So, but it does create a problem because there are a number of legislators, both on the Senate and the House side, that charter schools is a very important factor. I mean, when I go to Malden and see the Mystic Valley Charter School, and then look at the enrollment and the people who are involved in it, 90% of the local government have their children there and involved as directors of the school or contributors of the Mystic Valley Charter School. So it does create a problem even in the legislature when we're trying to say in Medford, Somerville, Everett, Chelsea, Revere, when all of those areas that we're trying to advocate for additional funds, it becomes very difficult when the Greater Boston, the Boston delegation in particular, are pro-charter school.
And just, I'll call it what I think it is. It's a slush fund for charter schools. The schools have, there's no other sector of public government that can bank money year to year. At the end of the year, if you haven't spent it, it goes back into the general fund, except for charter schools. And if you're going to be a public school, which charter schools claim they are, you have to play by the rules like everybody else does. So for landlocked teachers in Medford, the charter schools in Medford can't be held harmless, and that's what's happening right now. So there has to be a fundamental change. There are lots of good ideas, and some superintendents told some of them out there. It always takes in the House 81 votes. So it might sound great for Medford. How do we get 75, 80 other reps to join us to support that? We have to make sure that the changes we do impact enough communities in a positive way that we get enough votes for it. So it's not always easy, even if it sounds good for us, but the charter school issue, I think, has legs this year. Politically, they've been very protected over many years, but the fiscal crisis is so severe and so drastic that with $133 million sitting in the banks and charter schools, that is unacceptable. And I think we have some movement this year on that issue.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it really clear. I know a lot of us have stood up, Matt and the superintendent and the representatives. It's not like we're against the charter schools. It's not like we're saying that forget about the charter schools and that we don't want them. I mean, it's great. Parents should have freedom of choice for themselves and for their children. The only thing that I personally don't understand, especially on our school committee, is that I don't understand if we're getting the money out of the same pot, why is it that they are being exempt and they're being protected in a way and we're not? The other thing I don't understand is, like in the last cut, even though the governor did not take money and cut our education per se, our cities have got cut. And when you're a public school system, the money has to come from all places, including our school system. My question was, why is it that, again, the charter school got protected and not a penny was taken away from any of their budgets?
Yeah, I just want to ask, do charter schools have the same access to federal funding for capital projects and state funding for capital projects that public schools have?
They've been pushing to get funding from the school building authority. They don't have it now, but they do get funds set aside just for their capital needs every year.
They get federal funds, but not state reimbursement from the school building system.
Okay, so part of the money that they hold aside is sort of to make up for that lack of capital funding.
They get an automatic hit every year. So in other words, saying if I had 4,800 students in Medford Public Schools and I got the same $833 or thereabouts, I'd have about $3.8 million I could sit on, which I don't get. I'd have to apply to SBA to get that, independent of these things. They get it just simply for being there. And that's, a question, because if you're not spending it on capital, what are you spending it on? And that accounts for part of the surplus. And that's really some of the questions. I see people sometimes shake their heads and say, we're not really against charging. We're really not. But you know what? The State Board of Education met a couple of weeks ago on Monday night before their regular meeting. And believe it or not, they couldn't define what the purpose of the charter schools was. They were sitting there struggling as to whether they were going to be laboratories of innovation or they were going to be parallel school systems and just provide parents with choice. And they struggled through that. And they couldn't come up with an answer as to what the real intent of the legislature was. And quite frankly, they really didn't have an answer on funding either. And these are the people making decisions for us with regard to education. Now, they're good people. I'm not knocking them as people. But quite frankly, it's a major issue that is not understood and has tremendous impact on finance. There's $300 million a year moving through the pipelines to fund charter schools right now. $300 million to run a parallel universe. There's 20,000 and change kids there. They say they have a waiting list of 25 million, but ask for the waiting list, see if you can ever find it. See if anyone will ever turn over the waiting list to see who it is. Most of these people were signed up 10 years ago and are no longer in school. It's a real interesting discussion.
Let me get,
Wrapping up, I did want to point out though that Mass Development has become sort of parallel school building assistance agency for the charter schools. And if you look at their annual report, they do hundreds of millions of dollars every year in bonding and loan guarantees and grants for construction of charter schools. So, and not for the public schools. So there's a parallel world of access to capital for building and expansion.
Yes.
that's clearly something people are interested in. So some more. Do you want to say something new?
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question. This year, first, my name is Claude Vizier. I'm the father of my daughter, she used to say. This year at DMR, we have saved all the church. So I would like to know if, definitely, I forget the line, we're gonna have. But I would like to know if definitely GMI family support.
Can you respond to the DMR cuts?
Because we have 9 C cut, another cut.
They've had 9 C cuts, and he's wondering about next year. And the answer is we.
Can you repeat the question, Tim?
Yes.
Or-
The question, I heard from the commissioner, Jehlen. So definitely we're going to family support.
Family support and DMR.
So as a parent, I have other family. She's always asking questions about family support. And also receiving support from DMR. So I know we're going to have it, or maybe we'll family support coverage. So I would like to know if that's going to happen, definitely. Because the commissioner said it's not clear yet, but from my perspective, I talked to different organizations, I know something might happen. But I would like to know exactly what's going to happen.
Well, the question is relative to DMR, Department of Mental Retardation, now Department of Developmental Disabilities, DDS. The question is about some of the budget reductions that were made to the Department of Mental Retardation. There was some 9C reductions made as part of our closing the budget gap for the current year. And in fiscal year 2010, there were some reductions made as part of the governor's recommendation to family support services, respite services. As part of receiving and analyzing the additional federal stimulus bill, there was an announcement made last week to use some of the enhanced Medicaid funding that we're getting from our Medicaid program, enhanced FMAP money, to restore a good portion of those cuts. So while the original budget recommendations proposed some cuts to family support services, some of those have been restored as part of the governor's recommendation and proposed use of additional FMAP. Now, the budget recommendations that are out there now is just the first step in the process. The House is now looking at the governor's budget recommendation, and they will, within the next week or two, come out with their own recommendations, and there'll be another opportunity to revisit funding at the Department of Mental Retardation. And there'll also be an opportunity when the budget is passed along to the Senate to revisit. Again, the situation doesn't get better as we progress through the branches, and it's not to be expected that a lot of the cuts that are being proposed, both in the governor's budget recommendations, will be restored as it goes through the budget process. So I think folks need to be prepared for probably worse news as opposed to better news, but there has been at least some good news on that front with respect to some of the additional federal stimulus dollars over the past week to restore some of those reductions that were made. But again, it's not an exact answer to your question because the process is yet to be over.
I mean, just remember the fact that things are going to get, the governor doesn't have the last word, and what does have the last word is the revenue. So So unless we change the revenue, things are gonna get.
What happened?
And so it is up to us. And not, by that I mean not just the people in the legislature. And that's why I wanted to have this forum again, is to talk to you about what the real situation is and what the options are. And I think Judy at least helped us start framing what the choices are and what the values we have are, and which, I mean, I don't think we can just say taxes. That's not a real winner. We have to say, what? I think that we need to practice thinking about what is, I want to also say that I don't think we can say that everything about government is virtuous, and I would never do that. I want to acknowledge the real grievances that people have against some people in government. That some things that we do are outrageous, and some things that we're going to try to change have been outrageous, and some things we probably won't change. But I don't think that, I don't want to pretend that it's all good and you should just give us more money and we will do good stuff. It's really up to the people in a democracy to make sure we spend the money right and that we spend the right amount of money. I'm going to do Michael. Oh, you keep raising their hands. Then I think, what?
Very good.
That's it. We set it on the left, and then on the right.
I can keep mine quick, or you can move on. I'll let you take my show. So, Michael Schindelman, Winchester School Committee Chair. I first want to just thank all the legislators who came out here to hear us and give us information tonight. All the people here. I really appreciate that. I'd also just want to exhort all of you to not balance that budget on the backs of the municipalities and communities. I do see I saw the information, I understand the need and some of the issues, but remember, our sole option really is cuts. When it comes down to it, we're constrained by Prop 2.5. We don't have the revenue raising options that I think exist across the state. The local communities really have much less option.
Do you want them?
Yeah.
We would love to have more options, like, to the communities that it helps, absolutely. But what we just remember that cuts to local aid wind up being cuts in services, right? And that to us, it's really where it falls to us. It's whether it's a larger class size, fewer DPW workers, delaying maintenance. That's what we're left with. And I just want to, you have more options. Please look at all of them and try to use them as strongly as you can.
Yeah, I'm the co-chair of the Municipal Relief Commission. And we are investigating and trying to find options for local communities to find revenue opportunities for them. And those are meals tax, hotel, telecommunications, part of the governor's municipal package #2, and some other opportunities for regionalization of government that was spoken about this evening. But let me caution that one question was asked relative to why not just raise the 5.3 to 5.95 where it was a few years ago. And if you recall, when the legislature dropped it down to 5.3 from 5.95, the public voted for 5. And the legislature was criticized for even going to 5.3. And many of the legislators were screamed and yelled at during the course of that discussion. They still haven't reformed. They didn't go to the quote of the public. So the same is going to apply when we come up with this commission report within the next 2 weeks, in concert with the governor's municipal relief package. That it's incumbent upon those who are advocates for better education, better police protection, fire protection, and enhancing our local communities. We in the legislature are going to need your support to do that, because there's going to be another group out there that's saying, we're laid off, we have no money, we're trying to protect our homes, we're trying to protect everything else we have, and what are you doing? You're nickel and diming us to death, and that's not gonna help the situation. But we've gotta find a balance.
I feel like we kept you past the time we told you would, but if people should feel free, some of our speakers might be willing to answer another question in person, and I know my colleagues and I are always glad to talk to you anytime, anywhere.